My wife cheated on me with her boss, stole $150, $0 from our joint account, and now she's trying to claim half my inheritance in a court battle I never saw coming. Everything's falling apart. I still can't believe how quickly everything fell apart. One day I was just going about my usual routine, thinking I had a pretty good marriage. My wife and I had been together for 7 years, and honestly I thought we were solid. She was always a little bitchy, but I figured it was just her personality. She's the type who always has a snide comment ready, acts like she's better than everyone else, and loves to throw her weight around. But she was hot, so I kept my mouth shut most of the time. We lived in a nice house in the suburbs, had 2 kids, and I was finally starting to feel like I was getting ahead financially. I was running my own business and was working part-time at a boutique downtown. Things weren't perfect, but I thought we were happy enough. Then, out of nowhere, I started noticing little things that didn't add up. It started with small stuff, her phone ringing late at night when she was supposed to be asleep. She'd get defensive if I asked who was calling. Then she started coming home later than usual, saying she was working late or meeting friends. But I could tell she was lying. Her excuses didn't match her behavior, and her phone was always locked tight. I didn't want to be that guy who was paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. One day, I decided to check her phone when she was in the shower. I know that's invasive, but I was desperate for answers. I found texts, flirty messages, suggestive photos, even some explicit talk with her boss, a guy named Mark. The messages weren't just innocent banter, they were clearly about having sex. I saw plans to meet up, secret locations, and even some dirty talk about how much she enjoyed being with someone who could really satisfy her. My stomach dropped. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, so I kept digging. I looked through her social media, her email, even her bank statements, and that's when I saw something else. Transfers from our joint account, large sums 150, zero in total, disappearing over the past few months. I thought maybe she was investing or paying off something, but the transactions weren't labeled. They just vanished. I remembered that she'd been acting strangely about money lately, asking to spend more, saying we deserved it, but I didn't realize she was secretly stealing from us. That night I sat her down, my mind racing. I confronted her about the texts, the late nights, the missing money. Her face twisted into a sneer, and she told me I was overreacting, that I was paranoid, and that I was just jealous because she was more successful than me. She claimed the texts were just flirtation, that Mark was just a client, and that I was imagining things. She said I was making a big deal out of nothing and that I should trust her. But I knew better. I could see her lying, her eyes darting around, her voice shaky but trying to sound confident. That moment hit me hard. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and angry all at once. How could she do this? How could she cheat on me with her boss, steal our money, and then lie about it all? The emotional weight was unbearable. I spent the night staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my head, trying to make sense of how I'd been so blind. I thought we had a good life, a good marriage, but it turns out I was just fooling myself. Had been planning her escape, and I was the last to know. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know what yet. All I knew was that my world was crumbling, and I had to figure out what to do before it was too late. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't sleep, couldn't concentrate. Every time I looked at, I saw her differently. Her smug smile, the way she'd lie so effortlessly, like she thought she was untouchable. I started noticing how she'd act defensive at the slightest thing, like I was the one accusing her of murder instead of just asking questions. It was clear she knew I'd found out, and she was trying to cover her tracks. I decided I had to confront her again, but this time I was ready. I wanted to get all the facts straight, to see if there was more I'd missed. I kept digging through her phone, her emails, her bank accounts, and what I found was even worse than I thought. She transferred more than just money. She'd opened new credit cards in my name, ran up thousands in debt, all while pretending to be the perfect wife. She'd even been talking about divorcing me, saying she deserved half of everything, including my inheritance, in some court battle she'd been planning behind my back. I was furious. How could she do this? How could she lie, cheat, steal from us, and then threaten me with legal battles? I felt like I didn't even know her anymore. But I kept calm. I knew I needed a plan, something to catch her in the act, or at least expose her in a way that would make her regret everything. One night, I decided to set a trap. I installed a hidden camera in the bedroom, aimed at the spot where she'd meet Mark. I wanted to catch her red-handed if she was still sneaking around. It felt dirty, but I couldn't trust her anymore. I also hired a private investigator just to follow her around and see if she was really meeting Mark or anyone else. It was hard to admit I was doing all this, but I was desperate to find the truth. The night came and I waited in silence. The camera footage revealed what I already suspected. She was meeting Mark. Not just for a quick coffee or a business lunch. No, they were sneaking into a hotel downtown, doing who knows what. The images made my stomach turn. She was in bed with him, kissing, touching, the whole thing. I watched her lie to my face, tell me she was working late, when she was really with her boss, having sex, stealing from us, and plotting her next move. I was crushed. All those years I'd spent trying to build a life, trying to trust her, and she was just using me. I felt betrayed beyond words. The sting of knowing she'd been lying for months, maybe longer, was almost too much to bear. I went to bed that night feeling hollow, numb, like I'd lost my sense of reality. The next morning I sat her down again, this time with undeniable proof. I played the footage for her, watched her face turn pale as she realized I had her caught. Her eyes darted around, trying to come up with a lie, but I wasn't buying it anymore. She tried to deny everything at first, saying I was stalking her, that I was imagining things. When I showed her the bank statements, the transfers, the credit cards, she finally broke down. She started crying, saying she was sorry, that she'd made a mistake, that she didn't want to lose everything. But I wasn't buying her tears. I knew this was just her trying to save herself. I looked at her and realized I couldn't trust her anymore. That's when I decided I had to do something drastic. I couldn't keep living in this nightmare, knowing she was lying, cheating, stealing, and planning to take everything from me. My money, my inheritance, my life. I knew I had to fight back, to reclaim what was mine, and to make her pay for what she'd done. That's when the wheels started turning. I had enough evidence now to confront her with the truth, but I also knew I needed to be smart. I couldn't just blow everything up in the heat of the moment. I had to plan my next move carefully. I started gathering everything: documents, bank statements, recordings, and I was already thinking about how to turn this all around. Because if she thought she was going to walk away with my money, my house, and my future without a fight, she was dead wrong. I was done being the nice guy. It was time to take control. After I gathered all the evidence, I knew I couldn't just confront right away. She was already on edge, and I had to be careful not to give her any reason to spin things further out of control. I spent the next couple of days planning my move, trying to figure out how to expose her fully without giving her a chance to manipulate the situation or turn it against me. Meanwhile, was still acting bitchy and entitled. She kept insisting I was overreacting, calling me paranoid every time I brought up her lies or the money she'd stolen. She'd say things like, "You're just jealous because I'm more successful than you," or "You're imagining things. I love you, but you're just insecure." It made my blood boil. She had the nerve to act like she was the victim, like I was the one ruining everything. But I knew better. I knew what she was capable of now. One night, I decided to confront her again, but this time with a plan. I told her I wanted to talk about our future, about the fact that I'd been looking into the finances and found some disturbing things. She tried to brush it off, saying I was making a big deal out of nothing, but I pulled out the bank statements and transaction records I'd printed. I laid everything out on the table: how she'd stolen $150, $0, transferred money into her own accounts, and lied about her whereabouts. Her face went pale and she started stammering. She tried to deny everything, claiming the money was a loan from her sister or some investment she'd been planning. But I wasn't buying her bullshit anymore. I told her I knew she'd been cheating, stealing, and lying, and that I had enough. I warned her that I was going to take legal action, and that I was prepared to fight for everything that was rightfully mine: my inheritance, my house, my dignity. Her reaction was classic. She got defensive, tried to guilt-trip me, and then suddenly turned into a victim. She said I was ruining her life, that I didn't understand her, that she was under so much pressure. She cried and begged, claiming she made a mistake and that she loved me. But I'd heard enough. I told her I wanted her out of the house, that I was done with her lies, and that I was going to take her to court if she didn't leave peacefully. She stormed off, screaming about how I was ruining everything, how I'd never find anyone like her, how she deserved half of my inheritance because we'd been married so long. I just sat there, staring at the mess I'd helped create. I felt a mix of rage, heartbreak, and relief. Relief that I finally knew the truth, heartbreak over how badly she'd betrayed me, and rage at myself for not seeing it sooner. I started contacting my lawyer the next day, gathering all the necessary documents to file for divorce and to protect my assets. I also reached out to a financial investigator to verify all the transactions. The more I dug, the more I realized how deeply she'd gone. She'd been planning this for months, maybe longer. I was furious, but at the same time I felt a strange sense of clarity. I'd been a fool for so long, trusting her, believing in our marriage. Now I knew I had to rebuild, but I also knew I had to be cautious. While I was doing all this, was still trying to manipulate the situation. She kept calling, texting, crying, claiming she'd change, that she loved me, that she'd fix everything. But I was done listening. I saw through her lies now. I knew her game. She thought she could just spin her way out of it, but I wasn't going to let her. I had enough evidence to prove her guilt, and I was ready to fight for what was mine. The hardest part was the emotional toll. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and angry, but I also felt a strange sense of liberation. It was like shedding a skin I didn't realize I'd been wearing for years. I was starting to see a new path ahead, one where I could finally take control and rebuild my life without her dragging me down. It wasn't easy, and I knew there would be a long road ahead. But I was determined to see it through. I just hoped I could find some peace after all this chaos. The legal process moved faster than I expected once I had all my ducks in a row. My lawyer filed the divorce papers, and I made sure to include everything: proof of her affair, the stolen money, the unauthorized transfers, and her attempts to claim part of my inheritance. I wanted her to know I wasn't backing down. The court date was set within a few weeks, which felt like an eternity, but I knew I had to prepare for the worst. During this time's behavior only worsened. She became more aggressive, more bitchy, like she was trying to intimidate me into backing off. She'd show up at the house unannounced, scream at me in front of the kids, telling me I was ruining her life, that I was a terrible husband. She even started lying to her friends and family, spinning stories about how I was the one cheating and abusing her. I just kept my distance, letting her dig her own grave with her lies. One afternoon, I found out she'd been talking to a lawyer of her own, trying to prepare her defenses. That's when I realized she was serious about fighting for her share of the inheritance. The thought of her trying to claim half of everything I worked for made my blood boil. She had no shame, no conscience. All she cared about was herself and how much she could get out of me. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I hired a private investigator to follow her again. This time I wanted to catch her in the act of doing something shady, something I could use as leverage. Sure enough, a week later, the PI brought back footage of her meeting with a lawyer, an older woman who looked like she was giving her advice on how to maximize her claim. The meeting was intense and was clearly trying to figure out how to spin her story in court. I saw her lying again, trying to pretend she was innocent, but I had proof she was planning this all along. Meanwhile, the financial investigator uncovered even more shocking details. Had been secretly funneling money into offshore accounts, transferring assets into fake companies, and even trying to hide some properties. She'd gone to great lengths to cover her tracks, but I had enough evidence to make her sweat. I knew she was desperate, and I was ready to use that against her. One night, I sat down with my lawyer and went over everything: her affair, the stolen money, the hidden assets, her attempts to claim my inheritance. We devised a strategy. I would present all the evidence at the court hearing, and I'd also request a forensic audit of her finances. I wanted to prove that her claims to anything I owned were invalid, given her betrayal and theft. I also planned to request sole custody of the kids, knowing she was too unstable to be a reliable parent right now. The day of the court hearing arrived faster than I expected. I felt a mix of anxiety and relief. I knew I had done everything I could to prepare, and I was determined to fight for what was rightfully mine. Showed up, looking frantic, trying to act innocent. She was still lying, still denying everything, but I had all the proof I needed. My lawyer presented the evidence: messages, bank statements, video footage, expert reports. His face drained of color. As the judge listened, she tried to spin her lies again, claiming I was a jealous, paranoid husband who was just trying to ruin her reputation. But her voice cracked when the evidence was laid out in front of her. The judge looked at her sternly, then at me, and finally made a ruling. She's claimed to half of my inheritance, citing her deceit and theft as grounds to keep everything in my name. She also granted me full custody of the kids, citing recent behavior and the affair as reasons she was unfit to care for them. When it was over, stormed out of the courtroom, screaming obscenities, promising she'd fight me in court again. But I felt a strange sense of relief, even though I was exhausted. I had won this round, and I knew it was just the beginning of the fallout. I also knew I had to be careful, was still dangerous, still manipulative. I decided to cut all contact, change the locks, and focus on rebuilding my life. In that moment, I realized how much damage betrayal can do, but also how important it is to stand your ground. I learned that trust is fragile, and once broken, it's almost impossible to repair. But I also learned that sometimes you have to fight for yourself, for your sanity, and for your future. I'm not proud of how I had to fight dirty, but I'd do it again in a heartbeat if it meant protecting what's mine. And now, I'm finally starting to see a path forward, one where I can breathe again and rebuild from the ashes of this nightmare. After the court victory, I thought I'd finally get some peace, but wasn't done. She was furious, humiliated, and more desperate than ever. She started showing up unannounced at my house, throwing tantrums in front of the kids, trying to guilt-trip everyone around her. She even went as far as claiming I was abusing her, that I was trying to keep the kids away from her unfairly. It was all just her way of trying to manipulate the situation, but I knew better now. I had the evidence, and I had the law on my side. The worst part was seeing how she was trying to spin her lies to her friends and family. She told everyone I was a monster, that I was controlling, that I'd cheated on her. That hurt more than anything, seeing the people I cared about believe her lies. It was like fighting a war on two fronts, legal and social. I didn't want to stoop to her level by trash-talking her publicly, but I also couldn't let her get away with destroying my reputation. Meanwhile, the financial fallout was still unfolding. I hired a forensic accountant to dig deeper into her assets, and what they uncovered was staggering. Had been draining accounts, hiding properties, and even setting up fake companies to obscure her assets. She'd gone to great lengths to hide her wealth, but the truth was coming out. I found out she'd been planning this entire scheme for months, possibly longer. Every new piece of evidence made it clear she was trying to leave me with nothing, while she moved on to her next target, Mark, or whoever she thought could help her. I also decided to hire a security team to keep my house safe. His behavior was escalating. She'd show up at odd hours, sometimes with friends, sometimes alone, trying to intimidate me into backing down. I didn't want any more surprises. I changed the locks, installed security cameras, and made sure I had a way to monitor everything happening around my property. I wasn't going to let her manipulate or threaten me anymore. Despite all the chaos, I started focusing on rebuilding my life. I cut ties with completely. I told the kids the truth in a way they could understand, nothing too detailed, but enough to let them know that mommy was going through some problems and that daddy was doing his best to keep everything stable. I didn't want to scare them, but I also didn't want lies to influence their perception of me. I also began therapy. I've been carrying this heavy burden of betrayal for too long, and I knew I needed help processing everything. Talking to someone helped me understand that I wasn't to blame, that I'd been a good husband, and that I deserved better. Slowly, I started rebuilding my confidence, focusing on my work, my kids, and my own well-being. Looking back, I realize how much I learned from all this. Trust is fragile, And sometimes people will do anything to get what they want: money, power, revenge. Greed and selfishness almost destroyed everything I'd worked for. But I also learned that I'm stronger than I thought, that I can stand up for myself, and that sometimes you have to fight dirty to protect what's yours. The biggest lesson is that you can't change other people, only how you react to them. I could have stayed passive, let her walk all over me, and ended up with nothing. But I chose to stand my ground, fight for my rights, and refuse to be a victim. It's not easy and it's not pretty, but it's necessary. And now, I'm finally starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. It's been a brutal ride, but I know I'll come out of this stronger, wiser, and more cautious about who I trust next time. Looking back now, I realize that everything I went through was a kind of wake-up call. Betrayal cuts deep, but it also forces you to confront who you really are and what you're willing to fight for. I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this, caught in a web of lies, theft, and deceit from someone I loved and trusted. But I learned that you can't control other people's actions, only your reactions. And I chose to fight for myself, for my kids, and for what's rightfully mine. The hardest part was facing the emotional aftermath. For a long time, I felt angry, humiliated, and betrayed. I questioned everything: my judgment, my instincts, my worth. But gradually, I started to see that those feelings didn't define me. Instead, they became fuel for my recovery. I had to rebuild not just my finances and reputation, but also my sense of self. That meant cutting out the toxic people, focusing on my children, and trusting myself again. Over time, I've come to accept that sometimes people reveal their true colors only when they think they can get away with it. Actions showed me that greed and selfishness can corrupt even the most seemingly normal relationships. But I also learned that true strength comes from standing up, even when it's messy, even when it hurts. I've become more cautious, more aware, and more determined to protect myself and my future. Now I'm not the same person I was before. I'm more guarded, yes, but also more resilient. I've learned to value honesty, integrity, and loyalty, things I once took for granted. My relationship with my kids has grown stronger because I've been honest with them about what happened, without scaring them too much. And I've started to rebuild my life, piece by piece, with a clearer sense of what I want and what I won't tolerate. If there's one thing I want anyone reading this to take away, it's this: never ignore the signs. Trust your instincts and don't be afraid to dig deeper if something feels off. People can hide their true selves behind a pretty face or a false smile, but the truth always surfaces eventually. Protect your heart, your assets, and your peace of mind. Because at the end of the day, the only person responsible for your happiness and security is you. And for those who find themselves in a similar situation, I'll say this: you're stronger than you think. It's okay to feel broken for a while. It's okay to be angry or to want revenge. But don't forget to focus on healing. Take control of your life, learn from your pain, and use it as a stepping stone to something better. Because no matter how dark the storm, the sun always rises again, sometimes brighter, sometimes warmer, but always after the rain. I'm not perfect and I still have scars, but I'm moving forward, and that's enough. Life goes on and so do I.